Imagine opening your utility bill next month and realizing you're personally paying a 20% surcharge to build the electrical plumbing for a tech billionaire's new AI factory.
Yeah, that's the reality we're heading toward.
Welcome to Gilded News. I mean, today our mission is to reveal this stark, honestly kind of uncomfortable gap between the economic narratives you're fed every single day and the actual hard data sitting right beneath them.
Right, the real numbers.
Exactly. We are looking at the scaffolding of how these stories are built around data points. We're going to strip all that framing away and see what the baselines are actually trying to tell us.
And we've got a massive stack of primary sources for this deep dive. We're
Right.
talking Bureau of Labor Statistics data, PGM grid filings, Bank of Japan
Which
statements.
are fascinating, by the way.
Oh, absolutely. Plus Reuters and Bloomberg reporting and some really eye-opening research from Goldman Sachs.
So the thesis for today's deep dive, and this is crucial, is that every single economic data point flashing across your screen comes wrapped in this pre-built narrative.
Right. It's designed to tell you exactly how to feel about the number before you've even had a chance to, digest the mechanics of it.
Like CPI is labeled in line, or the power grid is called manageable.
Or the central bank is praised as prudent. But look, baselines don't lie. Today, we're looking at three baselines: price, power, and rates.
And when you strip away that default framing, what you see is the infrastructure beneath the global economy straining, and it's straining in ways the mainstream narrative actively obscures.
It's hiding in plain sight.
Yeah. So let's start with the inflation narrative, specifically looking at the February Consumer Price Index report.
The famous CPI.
Right. And the consensus frame from almost every financial outlet was it was immediate and it was unified. Headline CPI was up 2.4% year over year. Core CPI was up 0.2% month over month. And the market's reaction, the headlines, the pundits, it was all essentially, CPI was in line, so we're fine, right? Okay, let's unpack this.
Right. Well, in line is a statement about the forecast. It's not about your grocery bill.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, it simply means the narrative architects got their prediction right for that specific 30-day window. But the underlying data tells a much, much more precarious story about where prices are actually heading.
Because digging into that Bureau of Labor Statistics data, there is a massive hidden inflection point that the consensus is completely glossing over.
Completely ignoring it.
Yeah. Shelter, which is, the single largest component of CPI, rose just 0.2% for the month. But if you look specifically at rent of primary residence,
So this is the key part.
right, it rose just 0.1%. That is the smallest monthly increase since January 2021.
Which is wild.
Yeah.
We're basically looking at 5 years of shelter disinflation finally showing up in a single data point.
Just boom, all at once.
Exactly. And to understand why this matters, you have to look at how CPI is calculated, right? Shelter inflation operates on a massive lag because people only sign leases like once a year.
Right, it's not like buying milk.
No, exactly. So for 2 years, shelter has been this stubborn, immovable object, keeping the official inflation metrics elevated, even while real-time asking rents were cooling off.
So if this new BLS trend holds, it should, theoretically pull core inflation down significantly.
In a vacuum, yeah. A 0.1% rent increase is exactly the victory the Federal Reserve wants to see.
But we don't live in a vacuum, unfortunately, because while shelter is finally cracking, I'm looking at the energy side of this exact same BLS report.
And it's ugly.
It really is. Energy was already up 0.6% for the month of February. Natural gas was up 10.9% year over year. Electricity up 4.8%.
And let's be clear about the timing here.
Yes, here is the absolute crucial context for you listening. This is the February data. This is a snapshot taken before the recent geopolitical shocks in the Middle East.
Right.
This is before global crude oil crossed the $100 mark.
And the Wall Street Journal actually caught this exact nuance. They published a piece noting that this is, quote, a CPI the Fed can't do much with.
Which is such a telling phrase.
It is. And the reason they said that comes down to a fundamental divergence between two different inflation gauges. The media feeds you the inline narrative based on the CPI, but the Federal Reserve actually prefers a different metric.
The PCE.
Right, the Personal Consumption Expenditures Index.
I want to pause there because, we hear those two acronyms thrown around a lot, CPI, PCE. Why does the Fed prefer the PCE, and why does it matter that it's diverging from the CPI right now?
Well, it comes down to how they measure your life. The CPI measures out-of-pocket urban consumer spending. It's relatively rigid.
Okay.
But the PCE is much broader. It measures all goods and services consumed, including things paid for on your behalf, like employer-sponsored healthcare.
Oh, interesting.
But more importantly, the PCE accounts for the substitution effect.
Meaning what exactly?
Well, if the price of beef skyrockets, the CPI assumes you just stubbornly keep buying expensive beef. The PCE assumes you're a rational human who will substitute chicken for beef to save money.
Ah, so it adjusts its weighting dynamically.
Exactly. And currently, the PCE is running hotter than the CPI. The Fed knows this. So while the media gives you this comforting inline CPI narrative, the underlying reality is causing severe friction.
And you can see that friction in the real world, like the University of Michigan Consumer Sentiment Survey.
Yes.
46% of consumers spontaneously, like unprompted, mentioned high prices eroding their personal finances.
Almost half the country.
Yeah. So this whole in line with expectations phrase just feels like a psychological trick. It's like a local weatherman accurately predicting a Category 5 hurricane.
That's a great way to put it.
Right. Like the forecast was spot on, the storm arrived exactly when the model said it would, and the destruction was entirely in line with expectations. But my house is still flooded.
Yeah, you're still underwater.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The expectation just makes the passivity feel rational. It tells you that you don't need to panic because the experts saw the water rising, but it completely ignores the fact that your purchasing power is just gone.
The forecast doesn't fix the flood. And the consensus reaction assumes inflation is totally under control because of this one report. But this February CPI, it is the last frame of an old movie.
Wow.
Yeah. It is the last clean number we are going to get for a while.
Because the March CPI is going to carry that war premium. It's going to carry the $100 plus oil we're seeing right now.
Exactly. The baseline data tells us shelter is cooling, but energy is heating up incredibly fast. Those two massive forces effectively canceled each other out in the February math.
But starting in March, energy takes the lead.
Yeah. If you are reading today's February number as a reassuring sign that the inflation fight is over, you are quite literally reading the last page of the previous chapter.
The new chapter has already started.
It has.
Which means, for you listening, if you're planning your household budget around mortgage rates or auto loans, you cannot rely on that CPI is fine headline. The real fork in the road for the Fed's rate decisions is coming up.
You need to watch the March 28 PCE release.
Right. That is the number that will dictate what it costs you to borrow money moving forward.
And, that physical ceiling of energy doesn't just dictate inflation on a CPI chart. It's actively crashing into the biggest technological narrative of the decade.
The AI boom.
Exactly. Energy isn't just about what you pay at the gas pump. It is the absolute physical constraint for artificial intelligence.
Which brings us to a really fascinating collision between the data and the consensus tech narrative. Every time we hear about AI data centers, their massive energy demands are treated as just a minor footnote to a miracle.
Right. Oh, it uses a lot of power, but look at what it could do.
Exactly. The narrative is overwhelming. New language models, trillions in investment, chips getting exponentially faster. The default assumption is, well, of course they need a lot of power, but isn't that just progress? Here's where it gets really interesting.
Progress, where you personally pay for the infrastructure that serves corporate compute. Goldman Sachs recently quantified this, and the numbers are just staggering.
They really are.
But to understand the actual mechanics of why this affects you, we have to look at the power grid itself. Specifically an entity called PJM Interconnection.
Right. And for context for the listener, PJM is the largest regional transmission organization in the U.S. They manage the power grid across 13 states and Washington, D.C., effectively keeping the lights on for something like 65 to 67 million people.
So a massive chunk of the country.
Huge.
Well, PJM just released a framework that honestly should have been front-page news across the country. They are essentially telling new data centers a hard truth: you must bring your own power plants.
Bring your own power plants. That's wild.
Yeah, or you have to operate under a connect and manage system where you face emergency curtailment.
And what does that mean practically?
Operationally, it means if the grid gets stressed during a heat wave or a bad winter storm, the grid operator has the authority to cut the data center's power first to keep residential homes online.
Okay, I'm trying to wrap my head around this. The grid operator is telling the largest tech giants in the world that they have to self-supply their own electricity.
Yes. That completely shatters the narrative of this unstoppable, frictionless AI expansion.
Because the physical grid simply cannot handle the math. Look, PJM's own internal forecasts predict a 35 gigawatt surge in demand over the next 5 years.
Wait, 35 gigawatts?
35 gigawatts. And to put that scale into perspective for you listening, 1 gigawatt is roughly enough to power a medium-sized American city.
Oh my God.
Yeah. PJM is saying they need to find enough electricity to power 35 new cities, and they need it almost immediately. And data centers account for more than 100% of this peak demand growth.
Okay, wait. I'm looking at these PGM numbers, and the math isn't mathing for me. How can a single sector account for over 100% of demand growth unless other sectors are literally shutting off their lights?
Because the baseline residential and commercial demand is actually shrinking.
Really?
Yeah, think about the last 10 years. Energy-efficient appliances, widespread adoption of LED lighting, better home insulation. Regular households and traditional office buildings are actually using less power.
Oh, that makes sense. But AI data centers run on a completely different physical reality. They require massive cooling systems and constant, dense 247 uptime.
So they're just gobbling up the savings.
They wipe out every single efficiency gain normal people have made and then demand 35 gigawatts on top of it.
Okay, the tech companies clearly need an astronomical amount of power. But why does the construction of a data center in, say, Virginia or Ohio affect the wallet of the person listening to this right now?
Because the physical grid, the high voltage lines, the transformers, the substations, that all has to be massively upgraded to handle that transmission.
Right.
And under the current regulatory rules, everyday ratepayers foot the bill for grid upgrades. Goldman Sachs projects that average residential electric bills will rise 6% by 2027, strictly to accommodate this data center build-out.
Just for the data centers.
Exactly. And Forbes cited energy analysts projecting 10 to 20% utility bill hikes across PJM's 13 states.
That's brutal.
PJM's own independent market monitor, an organization called Monitoring Analytics, looked at $23 billion in capacity costs linked to data centers that are scheduled to be passed to consumers.
$23 billion.
Yeah, and they described this as a, quote, massive wealth transfer.
A wealth transfer from everyday households to corporate hyperscalers. It's like a massive corporate mega factory moving into a small, quiet town.
Right.
The town council is thrilled about the so-called progress and the tech boom, but then the factory demands so much water that the town has to rip up the streets and build entirely new massive water mains just to service this one facility.
Yep.
And who gets the bill? The local residents see their water bills go up 20% to pay for pipes that only the factory uses.
And the narrative framing completely hides this mechanism.
Mm-hmm.
The evening news reports on the AI boom and record stock valuations, they don't run segments titled Publicly Funded Infrastructure for Private AI.
Definitely not.
The consensus treats AI as a software story or like a semiconductor chip story. But the hard data shows us that AI is fundamentally an electricity story.
The ceiling for AI isn't the chips, it's the kilowatts. And it's your electric bill.
Exactly. And what you can do with this information is check your local utilities' rate case filings, especially if you live in Virginia, Ohio, Pennsylvania, or anywhere in PJM's territory.
They're filing right now, aren't they?
Utilities are filing for rate increases right now to pay for these exact upgrades. This isn't abstract technology news happening in a vacuum in Silicon Valley. It's a 10 to 20% projected hike on your monthly utility bill.
So energy costs drive inflation, and electricity physically constrains AI infrastructure. Let's look at how these exact physical constraints end up trapping central banks and ultimately dictating global capital.
This is where it all connects.
Yeah. If you read the financial press right now, you will see a lot of praise for the Bank of Japan, the BOJ. They are currently keeping their interest rates frozen at 0.75%.
Just sitting there.
Right. And the prevailing narrative from the media is that the BOJ is being prudent. They're waiting for more data. They're being cautious before making a move. It sounds incredibly responsible. So what does this all mean?
Well, it sounds responsible until you look at the mechanics of their economy. History has a word for central banks that wait for perfect data while the ground shifts beneath them. It's not prudent, it's late.
Oof. Let's break down the mechanics of why they're late. The BOJ was fully expected by the markets to hike rates in April.
Right. Everybody thought it was happening.
But then the geopolitical situation flared up, specifically the conflict with Iran, and suddenly the BOJ was trapped. They completely froze.
What's fascinating here is we actually have primary sources raising the alarm from inside the house on this.
Really? Who?
Sasaki Kamita, the former chief economist of the BOJ, explicitly stated that they are already lagging in tackling inflationary pressures. And to understand why the Iran conflict specifically trapped them, you have to look at Japan's energy supply chain. Japan is an island nation that imports virtually 100% of its energy, primarily crude oil.
Right.
And global oil is priced in US dollars.
Which is the kicker, because Iran controls the Strait of Hormuz, which is a massive choke point for global oil shipments. When instability flares up there, the threat to supply chains causes global crude prices to spike.
Instantly.
And a spike in global crude is instantly devastating to an economy that has zero domestic oil production.
Which brings us to the vicious feedback loop of their monetary policy. Because the BOJ is keeping their interest rates frozen at a tiny 0.75% to be prudent, while the US Federal Reserve has rates up above 5%.
Right, massive gap.
Capital naturally flows away from Japan and toward the US to get a better return. This makes the Japanese yen incredibly weak against the dollar.
Ah, I see.
So a weak yen makes that dollar-priced imported oil drastically more expensive for Japan.
This is just an impossible catch-22. The longer they keep rates low to avoid shocking their domestic economy, the weaker their currency gets.
Yep.
And the weaker their currency gets, the more expensive their imported energy becomes, which drives their domestic inflation even higher.
It's a spiral.
It's like trying to bail water out of a sinking boat by pulling the wooden planks off the hull to make a bucket. The delay weakens the currency, which just lets the exact inflation they want to fight flood right in.
That's spot on. The media's use of the word prudent here is entirely a psychological absolution device. It makes inaction feel like wisdom. But the BOJ's prudent weight is actively compounding a global crisis.
We need to make this tangible for the listener, though. Why should someone sitting in Dallas or Chicago care what the Bank of Japan does with their interest rate?
Because Japan is the world's largest foreign creditor.
Okay.
Japanese investors hold massive amounts of US Treasuries, the government bonds that effectively set the baseline for American interest rates.
Right, the 10-year yield and all that.
Exactly. Right now, because the prudent delay in Tokyo today guarantees a tighter, more expensive credit market in the United States tomorrow.
This brings us to the ultimate realization of what we do here at Gilded News. If we look back at the three baselines we covered today, we see that the old model of consuming economic news is fundamentally broken.
It's totally fragmented.
Yeah. The old model tells you that these gauges operate entirely independently. You get a CPI report on Tuesday, a grid forecast on Wednesday, a rate decision from a central bank on Thursday.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the data shows us that they are a highly unified system. Each gauge physically and economically constrains the next.
Energy costs, driven by geopolitical shocks and structural supply issues, feed directly into the CPI.
Right.
But that same electricity isn't just a price on a chart. It is a physical constraint on the entire artificial intelligence revolution.
And the demand for that electricity is driving up utility bills, which will show up in next month's inflation data.
It's all connected.
Those persistent inflationary pressures then force central banks into impossible traps, where their delayed rate decisions redirect trillions in global capital flows, ultimately hitting your personal borrowing costs.
It's a perfect circle.
Read one gauge in isolation, and all you see is a number that the media tells you is in line or prudent. But read all three together without the narrative framing, and you see the ceiling. You see the actual architecture of the global economy straining under the weight of physical reality.
As we wrap up today's deep dive, I want to leave you with a question to mull over. It's the provocation we keep coming back to. In each of these stories, the inline CPI, the inevitable AI expansion, the prudent central bank who built the narrative frame.
And more importantly, who benefits from you accepting that frame without checking the data?
Exactly. Who benefits when you think the inflation fight is over? Who benefits when you blindly pay a 15% higher electric bill to subsidize a corporate data center? This is not a conspiracy question. This is a fundamental economic literacy question.
Knowledge is only valuable when you strip away the packaging and understand how the machine actually works.
And you deserve the primary sources. We don't want you to just take our word for it. We posted all of the primary sources for today's deep dive, the BLS data, the PJM grid filings, the Bank of Japan statements over on our X account at Real Gilded News. Go look at the filings yourself.
And join us for our Friday capstone. We are going to synthesize this entire week's stress fractures. We'll take everything we've uncovered and set up exactly what you need to watch ahead of next Wednesday's crucial Federal Reserve meeting.
Follow Gilded News on X, that's at Real Gilded News, for daily clips and the stories behind the stories. We'll see you on Friday.